Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Water Matters podcast. Pleased to be back, joined by Tim. Tim, who has recently done an update. If you listened to the previous episode to this, or I should say, watched the previous episode to this, because it is one as much for the eyes as it is for the ears. Tim recently returned to Northamptonshire to back to the site of Rushden Lakes over there, where beavers were released around about a year ago. And so we had a little update. And so first of all, I would say if you haven't watched or listened to the previous episode, please do that. Because we're going to reflect a little bit on that, because I wasn't there. I have watched the episode. It's fascinating. It's very interesting, and some really good video footage as well, which is why I would urge you to watch it if you're able to, because there's some really interesting sort of behind the scenes details that you can see of what the beavers have been up to. It was around about 11 months ago that we released our first episode relating to this topic, this subject, where beavers were released for the first time, I believe, in like 400 plus years in Northamptonshire. And so that was episode 9 of our Water Matters podcast. If you haven't watched that one, I would encourage you to go back, and that's your starting point on this subject. So you'll find out all about it and sort of why it came about and the full story. Sort of that was the starting point. But Tim, you were there not too long ago. What on reflections? It has been a week or a couple of weeks now since you returned over there and talked to the team at the Wildlife Trust. But any takeaways that you've got on there since the visit?
Yeah, definitely. It was a great day. I got to be David Attenborough for the day with a film crew and everything going around the site. And it was basically 1 year on from when the beavers were first released. And yeah, you're right, first beavers in Northamptonshire for 400 years. So we got to see what they'd been up to over that year. And it was quite amazing, actually. It exceeded expectations. I thought there'd be, one or two stumps to look at. But there was quite a lot of felled tree activity.
Yeah.
There was a lot of canal activity. So they build these routes that they call beaver canals that go through the reed beds to different strategic positions and different feeding positions, and whole willow trees fully pollarded. So I don't want to use the term felled too much because it sounds like they've killed lots of trees.
Sure.
Some trees they did kill, so they fell them and fully strip the bark and eat. But a lot of them they pollard, which means they eat the branches down, like a pruning essentially.
Yeah.
They eat the branches down to the stump, and then in spring those regrow again. So they do those to willow trees a lot.
Okay.
But yeah, it was amazing walking around with Ben, our host from the Wildlife Trust there, and he was showing us around. And they've added new kits, so the family has grown. So the mum and dad are called Boudica and Alan. I feel Alan was shortchanged a bit on the naming front. So Boudica, the matriarch, has raised more kits.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the kits were Holly and Willow,
Okay.
which apparently was like a local competition for the school kids to name. So they came up with Holly and Willow. But yeah, this growing beaver family on this lake in Northamptonshire, right next to the busy Rushden Lakes shopping centre.
Yeah.
It's such an odd site in a way, but also such a wonderful site, and it's great that it's so close to, people. That people can access it and walk around and see what's going on.
And you can tell from certainly the conversation, Ben's input into it, him in particular, just how passionate he is about the fact that they now have these beavers at the wetlands there, isn't he? He's really, really sort of very fascinated by what they're doing, I suppose, and almost the way he talks about it with such passion, it's like they're part of the team there that they have at the Wildlife Trust.
Yeah, definitely. Fully passionate. And I would recommend watching it on YouTube. So to all listeners of the podcast, we do record, we do film all our podcasts, including this one in the studio, which, if you want to watch us talk, you're more than welcome. We're both looking good. But the films actually out somewhere are really worth watching. And this one, with seeing the beaver activity, seeing Ben, seeing the lakes, really would recommend checking that out on YouTube. But yeah, Ben's really passionate, and I almost get the feeling he's still a little bit in shock that it's happened and it's happening, because there's a lot of build-up. There's a lot of preparation for these beaver reintroduction sites.
Yeah, that's very true. I suppose in my little introduction there, I said our episode 9 was kind of the starting point, and because that was sort of evidence or video footage of the release of the beavers, but of course that really wasn't the starting point. Ben and his team would probably have a go at me for saying that, because I'm sure the starting point was years prior to that. Because, as you say, there was a huge amount of work. And
exactly. For them, it was almost a mini end point. They'd been 4 years, I think, in the planning from initial idea, and then finally the release happened. But for us, it was the start. We got to arrive at the release day, and see it happen. But a year on was as much a journey of discovery for them, because again, a lot of it was theory as to what the beavers would do and where they would go and if and where they would build their lodges. And now they've got actual kind of evidence and understanding. Because
we were certainly very interested to hear what they've been up to and sort of what has happened over that year, because I'm sure I don't need to remind listeners of a podcast about or called Water Matters about just how dry 2025 was. And so certainly I was wondering, did the beavers have anything to do at all, and were they just sunbathing, and sort of, not that beavers sunbathe,
I don't know, maybe they do.
It wasn't, one way of looking at it could be perhaps they didn't have much to do during the drought and the hosepipe bans and all of the sort of that weather that we were all used to for such a long time in 2025. But your most recent article that you have written that is on the watermatters.life website, it's another thing that listeners should go and visit and read your latest article on that. It does answer that sort of question that I had over what were they doing during such dry weathers. Do you want to share a few details about that?
Yeah, because it was a fascinating year to be introduced because of the drought. The drought was almost started just after they arrived. It was very wet in February, but from March onwards it was dry. But interesting, that actually made the beavers more active, because beavers dam and build canals in order to always be in the water. So they want as wide a water body as possible, a wider kind of water environment as possible to move around in. They do that partly because they're really good swimmers. They're better on water than on land. But also mostly because they evolution. That's a word I can't do. I think we know what we mean. They kind of, their behaviour is to avoid predators. So they're expecting wolves in the background, and if they stay on water, they're relatively safe from wolves. We don't have wolves in the UK, but when beavers were around, there was a time when wolves were. So they feel safe on water. So when the water levels were going down during the drought, Ben was telling me they had to, had to build more canals. They were having to kind of keep the environment as wet as they could. And also and I didn't know this was the beaver behaviour, and I'm not sure Ben did too, but they also had to keep building new lodges to keep with the water level. So Eurasian beaver's lodge is very different to a North American beaver's lodge, where the North American beaver's lodge is almost like a mini wooden chalet. It's not, but you know what I mean? It goes above ground. The Eurasian beaver, which we have in the UK, is more like a kind of more like a badger den. They dig down and then put some stumps of trees or some twigs on top to kind of cover it like a roof.
So mostly underground.
Mostly underground, but then the whole at the bottom of the den goes out to the water.
Right.
So their escape route, again, from wolves or from humans more likely, is to go down into the water. So if the lake level is going down or the river level is going down, they will build a new lodge again down to the water level.
I'm with you.
So they actually had to be pretty active during that year. And also, so I also asked him about damming. So all the reintroductions to date, although this week there have been some different ones which we'll talk about later, have all the reintroductions up until last year had basically happened on lakes, because they had to be fenced in according to the Natural England and DEFRA requirements. They had to be fenced in by wooden fences and weren't allowed to be wild on rivers. So a beaver, again, dams in order to create a large water body. So you'd have thought they'd be absolutely happy on a lake. But actually their natural instinct is to seek out running water. And I've been to a couple of other beaver sites too, and they've all told me that if there's any activity or any kind of beavers trying to get through fences, they can't get through them. But if they are kind of having a little nibble, it's always near running water. They're always drawn to try and get to running water. And in the Rushden Lakes, Ben said at one point there was flooding, and there's just a trickle of water, he said, running from the lake over into the river valley below. And he said just that trickle of water was enough the beavers all got together and built a tiny, he said probably the smallest dam in the world, but dammed that trickle of water.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want to do, is dam running water. So that was kind of fascinating.
And was that a good thing for the actual sort of wetlands? Were they, or did that cause sort of an issue there?
No, I think it was a good thing. Yeah, because he said it was so minimal.
Right.
So they wouldn't have noticed it, as in the Wildlife Trust wouldn't have noticed that there was a tiny trickle of water going down.
Yeah.
But no, mostly it's been a good thing. And he said in general, the beaver activity has been a good thing. So typically one of the Wildlife Trust jobs in a year is to start thinning out the willow from the reed beds, because willow and reed compete ultimately. Willow is kind of expecting to be pollarded by beavers, but beavers disappeared a few hundred years ago. So a volunteer job every year is to start thinning out the willow. And I've also been to some sites where they have to literally mow reed beds, because also reed beds, if they don't have the willow, can grow too thick. But now they've got the beavers in there pollarding the willow, eating some of the willow, and building these canals going through the reed beds. It's job done.
Yeah.
So they found it a lot easier to manage this site because the beavers are managing it for them.
Yeah, they've taken some work off some of the people there.
Yeah, but I don't think it was fun work.
The AI of the nature world.
Maybe. But yeah, I don't think it's stuff that people are going to be hugely sad about.
Sad not to do.
Yeah, I was wading out and got water in my wellies.
Yeah, I did notice it did look pretty wet over there, which is not surprising given the last couple of months of rainfall that we've had.
Yes, now it's the opposite. So we have had a really wet start to 2021. 2021, blimey, that's a flashback. 2026. And I do remember last year saying that the projections were from the water companies that we need to have an extremely wet winter to make up for the drought last year. And it looks like we've lucked out again because we have had a very wet winter.
Yeah. I remember conversations we had about it, and so hopefully it is replenishing all that water that we didn't get during 2020.
Yeah, I mean, possibly another episode for another day to really dig into the detail of that. But it looks currently good for recharge levels for sure.
And just the beavers themselves, you didn't see any?
No, sadly, no. The only time I've seen a beaver is the reintroduction because they were released from the cage.
Yeah.
Other than that, they're very shy creatures. They are nocturnal. Ben used a fancy word for it, which was slightly different to nocturnal, which they come out at dusk. So they a bit like foxes, I guess. They emerge at dusk and then do most of their activity at night.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're fairly rare to actually see. So if you're there in the daytime, you're not going to see them.
Yeah, but anyone that has watched the previous episode will get the benefit because they have put up cameras, haven't they, around the wetlands. And so unfortunately we have access to that through our day job at Graph, through a sponsorship of the Wildlife Trust and of said cameras. And so it really is worth watching that episode because you do see a lot of footage of the beavers and what they're up to, which, as you say, is just a very rare opportunity to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I'd recommend checking out the camera footage because that is the best way to see beavers. And it's really nice to see the little kits as well when they emerged in the lodges. And yeah, it's really nice to see.
At the moment, they're still fenced in. They have to be fenced in because even though, certainly since we spoke about this originally, a year ago or so, the rules have changed somewhat, have they not?
Yeah.
But at the moment, not within the Northamptonshire site.
Yeah, so all beaver reintroductions from the kind of mid-2000s onwards, up till February last year, had to be, for the licence to happen, you had to go through quite a long process. The main requirement was, once you ticked all the previous boxes, you had to fence them in with a metal fence that goes both underground and a certain number of metres above ground that beavers can't get through. And a lot of the conversation, and probably our conversation last year, was me saying, we'll only get the real water benefits of beavers, which is both flood prevention and drought alleviation, which we can get onto, when beavers are on rivers, when they become fully wild, which they should be. I say they should be. They're re-recognised as a native species in 2022. So we have known that and allowed them to be native, and they're protected. As I say, the last beaver in England was only in 1789. So it's not ancient history here. This is kind of relatively recent history that our waterways existed with beavers. Anyway, so that's kind of the context. But ironically, only 2 weeks after the reintroduction in Northamptonshire, the rules did change, and DEFRA and Natural England made a big announcement that wild beaver releases can now happen again if you meet quite an even longer list of requirement, specifications. There was one in Purbeck in Dorset in I think maybe March last year, and then nothing, no activity all the way up until this week. So it's been kind of interesting that the rules did change, but really not much happened.
The impact of the rules changing.
So I talked to Ben about this, and I said, well, can't you just remove the fences now? And he said, well, one, no, it's not that simple. You would have to go through the same license application process for a wild release, and it does sound quite long and onerous, and it's not now just site specific. So the relatively easy thing about reintroducing in a fenced environment is you've only got to tick the boxes in that fenced environment. In the wild release, you need to get the agreement of a full water catchment area, because obviously once it's on a river, it affects everyone on that river. So the nearby town, the nearby farmers, the nearby landowners, and quite rightly so. But you can kind of see why it's that much more complicated.
Yes, of course.
So they could apply for the fence to be removed now, but they're not currently planning to. Even though I think, and we got onto this in the film, Ben did say that ultimately that would be the goal. I'd love to see wild beavers on the River Nen, which is right next door to the wetlands. There's good evidence, this is me now saying this, there's good evidence that beavers on the River Nen would help reduce flooding in nearby Northampton town. So it could have a really huge benefit, and that's when we see the real benefit of beavers, when they're on the rivers. But the process of convincing all those stakeholders is a lot more complicated. And another point that Ben said, which I think is also very valid, is that it's quite useful to have some of these enclosed sites to invite people to for those conversations. So if you've got conversations with all those stakeholders, whether in that river catchment or a different one, and they want to come visit and show people, so show the farmers, show the landowners what beavers actually do. And there's still so many myths.
I was going to say, do you think they learn enough? Like, just what's your take on that? So it's almost like a trial site or a test scenario.
Exactly.
You could see it like that.
And one with a huge car park, which sounds kind of like a silly point, but it's actually very accessible.
Yes, it is.
There's a huge car park, but right next to the visitor centre, then a very short walk to the beaver site. So actually, in terms of proof of concept,
as an observation
site, actually the Nen Valley Wetland Centre is ideal. So I did get that. But equally, I am quite impatient to see more wild beaver releases.
And so they haven't started the process at all. You didn't get the feeling.
No, I don't think they've started the process at all. But that's just one wetlands trust site. So I was in touch with the wider wetlands trust this week, and amazingly, on Monday of this week, there were 2 wild beaver releases by wetlands trusts. So, by Wildlife Trust, not Wetlands Trust. I get them mixed up. But the Wildlife Trust released 2 beaver pairs on the Parr and Fowey River catchments, both in Cornwall. So these are the first ones that have happened since Purbeck. So really, they're wild releases number 2.
More than a year apart.
More than a year apart. So I got in touch with them, and they also said, and this may well be news for this podcast, that the Wildlife Trusts hope to be able to release around 100 beavers into 7 rivers across this year.
Wow!
Now that would be the game changer.
Because
so far all of them have been fairly remote. So Dorset, Devon, Cornwall. all very valid releases. Really excited to go see them at some point, but they're fairly remote from popular sources. But if we get onto 7 rivers, 100 beavers, that could be a game changer. So I think it's going to be a really exciting year.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost a what a time to be alive moment. That sounds really kind of hyperbolic, but this will only happen once.
Yes.
You know, this kind of this moment of beavers becoming wild again.
Normal again.
Wild again in the UK and in England.
Yes.
It might be this year, 2026.
And it does sort of make me think about perhaps they have got their locations right, because the south across the coast in particular has taken an absolute beating in recent sort of months, or recent weeks I should say. With rainfall, haven't they?
Yeah, there've been huge winter storms.
It's unbelievable.
So there's this kind of storm alleviation or flood prevention input or natural.
Probably a little bit too much for just a couple of beavers.
They might not be able to protect the coastlines.
No, quite.
But certainly the natural flood prevention that beavers offer is one of the main benefits.
Yes. Yeah, and that's for anyone that's not sort of too clued up on this topic, just from a general sort of first principles, that's one of the biggest reasons that you're most sort of excited about this prospect and the possibility of if that does actually happen this year, with a positive impact on those 7 rivers, and the because of the release of those potentially 100 beavers, it is mainly because of the sort of natural stormwater management that they would.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons why I'm really excited, but those are the main ones. So when beavers were reintroduced in Scotland in the 2000s, there was official monitoring of them that went on for a number of years. And the studies that came out from that showed that where beavers were active, floods downstream were reduced by 60%, 60. And groundwater below was increased by 60% as well. Yeah. So there's both the flood prevention and the saving of groundwater, which is a drought alleviation measure just from beaver activity. So that's when water companies started getting interested. So a number of the beaver reintroductions have been partially funded by water companies because they're seeing those benefits. More recent study found a 40% improvement in turbidity downstream as well. So this is essentially cleaning the water. Turbidity meaning kind of how murky the water is. Yeah. So there's also a kind of a water quality improvement from beavers too. Yeah. Now there was one other wild release that happened this week, yesterday. This is ridiculously fresh news. The National Trust released beavers onto the River Aller in Somerset. So this is starting to get a bit closer now to some larger habitation, larger cities. Now, the River Aller is really interesting because whenever I give, this is on the Holnaket Estate, which is a National Trust house that some people might have visited at some point in Somerset. Now, whenever I give a water talk or a book talk, I tend to include a slide of the Holnaket Estate and the River Aller work that the National Trust did, because in 2023, they did what they called a control out delete or computer reset of the River Aller, because it was one of the many rivers in this country that was straightened during the 19th century, kind of canalised, removed from its original floodplain, no longer essentially a natural river along that stretch. So the National Trust put a lot of money and time into basically putting the water channel back to its natural course. I think it included like 4,000 tons of earth movement from builders. They had to artificially fell a lot of trees to lay across the river that they called leaky dams. The whole process cost, I think, £500,000. And when I give a talk, I always say, and that's money well spent, by the way, because those leaky dams, again, are doing exactly what I talked about, the flood prevention, widening the river, reconnecting it to its floodplain, which reconnects it to the aquifer, which improves our water storage. And I always end that slide by saying, but there's one thing that can do that job naturally and at no cost, and it's beavers. And the fact that they've yesterday actually introduced beavers onto that site is a really beautiful kind of full circle story,
Mm-hmm.
because now beavers will do that for them. And there will be no maintenance costs for the National Trust to kind of keep updating those leaky dams, because now beavers will be doing it naturally.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. It's a really lovely news story. Great to see.
Absolutely. I think at the moment it's hard not to see headlines about the awful impacts of flooding and just we as you say, it probably is a reason for, or a subject for, another full episode of the podcast, because it really has been very, very wet, hasn't it? And
yes.
We, in our sort of in the day job, being, quite public on the internet, trying to be as well known as possible with our company Graph, we do receive, because we're constantly sort of putting out content around stormwater management and rainwater harvesting and all this sort of stuff. We do receive a few sort of cries for help from people that are, experiencing flooding at their house or on the streets or whatever, and it's quite it's quite sad really that we, at that point, there's not much that any of our systems can do about it. We're more in the world of preventative measures, at the certainly new builds and when developments are being designed and created, it's more include the products and the services that we offer at that point, and hopefully you can prevent it ever happening. So when we receive these sorts of questions and inquiries about, well, this is my scenario, is there anything you can do to help? It's occasionally there's things that we could suggest, I suppose, but really it's not something that we're able to do much about. And so I think even though it may be over a very long period of time, and it could be quite a while before seeing the positive impact of these releases of beavers into these the river network, it's still really a positive to look forward to.
Definitely, and it's a really good point, because it's the system that has to change. So it isn't something that you can just individually do.
No.
Install one thing and say that's no longer, flooding is no longer an issue.
No.
And also it's important to say with beavers, so I think there's again another myth about beavers is that they're going to flood my house. They cause flooding as opposed to prevent it. Now technically, if you're living on a floodplain with beavers, that would be correct. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't want beavers in that catchment, and floodplains have been built on, and there's probably plenty of housing estates that are, they're not going to be ripped up now. They now are there, and you wouldn't want to reintroduce beavers there. Where you want beavers is upstream from you. So they're preventing, they're putting their leaky dams in above the town essentially, and causing a barrier to slow the flooding down. So it's all about, they talk a lot about pushing the peak down in flooding. So you can quite easily picture, if you've straightened and dredged a river, that speeds up the water. You've literally got a faster, more powerful body of water coming down, and then when it's in flood, that's going to flood your town. But once you've renaturalized or re-wiggled, I think we talked about re-wiggling on the podcast before, when you've renaturalized that river, you've got leaky dams in place, you've got beavers putting leaky dams in place, you've got a floodplain that's doing what it's supposed to do, soak up that water, put it down into the aquifer, then your town is safe. And we have literal evidence of that. So a town called Pickering in Yorkshire did exactly that. This is before beaver introduction, so again, like the Holnacut estate, quite an expensive process of artificially putting in leaky dams, but it saved Pickering from flooding ever since. So it slows the flow. So you want beavers in lots of strategic locations, largely out of town, but there are some urban areas where it's relevant. Largely out of town sites that are putting in these leaky dams and slowing the flow of flooding.
I was thinking, just as you were describing that, it could be perfect timing that we're releasing this and describing that, because anyone watching the Winter Olympics right now can just picture exactly what you've just described with any of the downhill skiing. It's the straighter they're going, the quicker they're going, right?
Yeah.
So it's possibly a helpful analogy for people.
And there
to
was
think
obviously some sense to it. I mean, the Victorian engineers were extraordinary, but largely the thinking then was to get the water away and out to sea as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've seen that around the world. It tends to be the mindset that with flooding, you want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. But we've had a change in climate now, changing population size, and largely the issue now is twofold. That it's too quick because the rainfall is now much more intense, so that flood water is just flooding areas really quickly. And speaking in February 2026, we're seeing that right now. Yeah. But also, we will be speaking about drought in July, August. We always do. And then you're like, well, what do we do with all that water? We have plenty of it. You need to hold on to it. So you need those leaky dams in place. You need that aquifer recharge, to use the technical term. And beavers do it. Beavers will do it for us if we let them out into the rivers.
Yes, yeah. And perhaps introduce more release sites more often than once a year.
Exactly. I mean, I was starting to get quite cynical that we'd only seen one in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, okay, well, they've been far too restrictive with the license requirements. And I think there's probably evidence that is the case as well. But now suddenly this week, I mean, it's amazing. If we'd done this podcast last week, that's what I'd be saying.
Indeed. But
suddenly this week there've been 3. But the particular exciting thing, though, is this Wildlife Trust announcement that they're aiming for 100 beaver releases. Well, 100 beavers released across 7 rivers this year. And if that does happen, that's a game changer.
Yeah. No, and it's a sort of a helpful reminder, as you say. It would have been a slightly different narrative if we'd have been talking about this a week ago. But that is one of the reasons that we wanted to introduce this Water Matters podcast, so that we are bringing the subject of sort of water management, to the surface more often, making it more of a sort of normal everyday conversation. And the regularity of these podcasts means that actually things are changing, things are happening. And so, thankfully, we're here, we're talking to, you and who are really dialed into what's happening and sharing with interested people what's going on in the world of water matters. So, I think,
it's super exciting. I mean, a lot's happened in this year.
Yeah.
And not to get too salesy about it, but I do recommend people check out our archive, because we have been covering these changes over this past year, and we will continue to do so. So do tell your friends about this podcast, or colleagues, people that are interested in water, because really we're all interested in water. If we think about it, it's hugely important, and it is a fascinating time for the water sector and water in general, and nature-based solutions. And so it's great to be able to keep people up to date on this.
No, exactly, and that is exactly what we're going to continue to do in relation to the beavers over in Northamptonshire as well, because we are, sort of working reasonably closely with the Wildlife Trust over there, aren't we? And we're communicating with them regularly. So, as I say, thankfully we get shared the footage from the cameras there, so that we can see what they've been up to, which we're sharing and we'll share even more so, sort of especially as the sort of seasons change and the weather changes and all that sort of stuff. So there's plenty, as I say, to look forward to and keep an eye on through either the watermatters.life website, or the easiest way would be to become a subscriber to the fortnightly email newsletter as well, and then we use that to communicate sort of more real time what's happening, and of course listening to the podcast, which also comes out every other Friday. So before we wrap up, Tim, anything in particular that on the subject of beavers, because it's probably our last episode on this topic for certainly a few weeks, maybe a month or so, but any final things that you would like to share about the beavers in Northampton?
It won't be our last episode on beavers. not whilst I'm around, Matt. Although the only thing that came to mind actually is that one beaver fact I learnt this week that I didn't previously know is that when beavers reach an adult age, so 2 or 3 years of age, they want their own. They need to go away from their parents and create their own habitat.
Okay, they need to move out.
The Northamptonshire beavers will have to move out.
Yeah.
The 2 older ones, the 2 older youngsters.
Yeah, the
will have to move out probably later this year or next year.
Interesting.
So there is an expansion that happens even in these kind of confined sites.
Okay.
So it'd be interesting to see if they're allowed to stay in Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
Could they be the first ones on the river then?
Yeah.
You know. Well, we will report as soon as we know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's lots to look forward to, and we will revisit this topic as soon as we have more information, for sure. Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in.
Always a pleasure
for this conversation. I hope it's interesting. A quick reminder. Yeah, watch the previous, certainly episode 9 and episode 20, the beaver related. Podcast episodes, and choose the YouTube version if you can, so that you get to see what they've been up to, and see with your own eyes what these beavers are doing, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode of the Water Matters podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Tim, for joining me.
Thank you,
and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks' time.